No one expected the courtroom to feel like a battlefield that morning. But the moment Dr. Adrian Miles walked in, everything changed. Reporters straightened their cameras. Lawyers whispered nervously. Even the officers near the door shifted their stance, as if preparing for impact. Because Dr. Miles didn't enter like a defendant. He entered like a king. Designer shoes, tailored suit. Hair styled like he was walking onto a magazine cover. His expression, cold, superior, untouchable. He didn't look at the people seated in the gallery. He didn't look at the young man in the second row limping, his mother clutching his arm. He didn't even look at the judge's bench. He simply scanned the room with a kind of confidence that wasn't earned, it was purchased. And then he smirked, as if the courtroom itself was beneath him. The clerk announced, "Case number 14 to 872, State of Rhode Island versus Dr. Adrian Miles." A murmur ran through the gallery. Everyone knew the name. Everyone knew the reputation. Top surgeon in the state. Millions in income, luxury cars, private penthouse. Award-winning medical brilliance. But behind that prestigious exterior, an ego large enough to crush anyone who stood in his way. He'd humiliated nurses, snapped at interns, ignored protocols, and blamed everyone but himself. His hospital called him unstoppable. But today, he was about to meet someone he could not intimidate, Judge Franko Carpio. The victim who never asked to be a victim in the third row, barely able to sit straight, was Eli Turner. 23, construction worker. The kind of boy who said yes ma'am and held doors open for strangers. He'd been injured on site. A fall, a shattered leg, a rush to the ER, and on the operating table, Dr. Miles made a decision. A careless one, a rushed one. A choice that permanently damaged Eli's ability to walk. When the hospital tried to sweep it under the rug, Eli's mother refused. Not for money, but because she wanted someone to admit the truth. She wanted someone to be accountable, someone to simply say, "We made a mistake." But Dr. Miles, he laughed, actually laughed, and said, "People like him should be grateful they survived." That quote lit the fuse. That quote brought him here. That quote was whispered across social media, replayed on news broadcasts, and repeated by witnesses who still couldn't believe he had said it. And when Judge Carpio heard the case, he demanded this hearing himself. The moment of collision, the courtroom door closed behind Dr. Miles. He didn't nod at the bailiff. He didn't acknowledge the judge. He only said one sentence under his breath, loud enough for the front row to hear. "Let's end this circus." That was mistake number one, and more were coming. He didn't walk to the podium, he strutted, like a man who expected applause. He placed one hand casually in his pocket, adjusted his tie with the other, and waited bored as if this entire hearing was an inconvenience. Judge Carpio glanced at him once and the room froze. Caprio didn't raise his voice. He didn't show irritation. He didn't show anger. He simply said, "Dr. Miles, do you understand the seriousness of this case?" Most defendants would respond with respect. But Dr. Miles, he tilted his head, gave a mocking half-smile, and replied, "With all due respect, Your Honor, maybe you don't understand who you're talking to." Silence. Absolute bone-deep silence. Someone in the gallery gasped. A young reporter dropped her pen. Even the stenographer stopped typing, her fingers suspended midair. Carpio's eyes narrowed just slightly, but his voice stayed calm, dangerously calm. "Dr. Miles," he said softly, "in this courtroom, everyone is equal." The surgeon let out a sarcastic laugh. "Equal, Your Honor, I save lives every day. I don't have time for this little performance." He gestured at the courtroom like it was trash he needed to throw away. The judge didn't blink. He didn't move. He only asked, "Is that how you see this? A performance?" Dr. Miles shrugged. "A construction worker made a poor decision, fell, and I did my job to keep him alive. Now his mother wants to turn it into a tragedy. Not my problem." Eli's mother covered her mouth, tears spilling out. Eli stared at the floor, jaw trembling. The room filled with anger, raw, silent anger, but Carpio remained still, so still it was terrifying. He leaned forward just an inch. "Doctor," he said quietly, "look at the man you are speaking about." The surgeon didn't move. Carpio repeated, "Look at him." Dr. Miles finally rolled his eyes and turned toward Eli. His expression remained cold, almost annoyed. And then he said the sentence that ruptured the room, "People like him should be grateful they're breathing." A woman shouted, "Shame!" Someone else stood up yelling. Officers stepped forward. Chaos erupted, but Carpio lifted his hand. Instant silence. One gesture, that's all it took. Then he asked the surgeon one question, a question so sharp it cut the arrogance right out of the air, the question that shook the room. "Dr. Miles," Carpio said, "would you say your time is more valuable than his?" The surgeon scoffed. "Obviously. A collective gasp filled the courtroom. Carpio nodded slowly, thoughtfully, like he had expected that answer all along. "Tell me, doctor, is a man's value measured by his paycheck?" No response. "By his education?" Still nothing. "By his ability to walk?" Dr. Miles shifted uncomfortably. Carpio continued. "Because the man you dismiss so casually, the man you call less than you, built the very roads you drive on. He built this city." The surgeon opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Carpio didn't let him breathe. "You heal bodies, doctor. He builds homes. He builds foundations." He leaned in. "And yet only one of you is acting like a human being today." The gallery murmured. People nodded. Even officers exchanged glances. Dr. Miles' jaw tightened. For the first time, the confidence cracked the turning point. Carpio turned to Eli. "Mr. Turner, would you like to speak?" Eli rose slowly, painfully. Every movement looked like it cost him something. He used the podium for balance. His voice shook, but his words didn't. "Doctor, I never wanted revenge. I just wanted you to care." The room went silent. You could hear breathing. You could hear sniffles. You could hear Dr. Miles exhale sharply. Eli continued, "You don't have to apologize to me. Just don't do this to someone else." Simple, pure, honest. And it hit harder than any shouted accusation could. Dr. Miles stared at Eli, but this time not with arrogance, with something else. Something unfamiliar, guilt, or fear, or both. The nurse who finally spoke. For a long moment, the courtroom stayed frozen. Dr. Adrian Miles stood proudly, chin lifted, jaw locked, his expensive silver watch glittering under the harsh ceiling lights, as if even the lights wanted to worship him. People whispered among themselves. But suddenly, from the second row, a woman in light blue scrubs shifted forward. She had been quiet the entire time, barely moving, hands folded, eyes down, a nurse. No one knew her name, no one paid attention. But Judge Carpio noticed everything. He leaned slightly forward. "Ma'am," he said gently, "you seem concerned. Would you like to speak?" The courtroom turned as one. The surgeon's eyes narrowed. The nurse swallowed hard, her hands trembling slightly. But she rose. At first the judge thought she was simply nervous. But no, this was not fear. This was a woman who had been holding the truth inside her chest for so long that speaking it now shook her entire body. She stepped toward the podium. Dr. Miles clicked his tongue loudly. "Oh, fantastic," he muttered. "We're calling nurses now?" A wave of gasps spread across the courtroom, but the nurse didn't flinch. Her voice was soft but steady. "Your Honor, my name is Lee Carter. I worked under Dr. Miles for 3 years. Just the sound of her name made the surgeon scoff. "Worked under," he said mockingly. "Exactly." "Under," Judge Carpio shot him a look so sharp it sliced the air. "Doctor," he said firmly, "you will remain silent unless addressed." Dr. Miles clenched his jaw. Lee continued. "I wasn't going to speak today. I told myself I wouldn't get involved. I've seen too much and said too little." She inhaled, her voice trembling. "But when I heard Dr. Miles say that Eli Turner should be grateful to be alive," her eyes filled. "I knew I couldn't stay quiet." Eli's mother covered her mouth. Reporters exchanged glances. The prosecutor straightened. Judge Carpio nodded gently. "Go on, Miss Carter." Lee swallowed hard and began. "Star, the night everything went wrong. It was a double-shift night," she said. "We were understaffed, overworked, tired." Her voice cracked. "And Dr. Miles, he wasn't supposed to operate at all." The surgeon jerked his head up. "That's a lie," Judge Carpio raised his hand. "Enough," Lee continued. He had already done 4 surgeries that day. He was irritated, snapping at everyone, throwing charts, calling residents idiots. The surgeon glared. "That's called pressure, sweetheart." Lee ignored him. "When Eli was brought in, Dr. Miles didn't even read the full report. He didn't check the scans. He didn't look at the blood pressure history." She wiped a tear. "He just said, 'Let's get this over with.'" Eli looked down at his hands. The room stayed still. "During the operation," Lee said, voice softening, "I saw him make a mistake, a small one at first, then a bigger one. I froze." We all froze. Her breathing turned shaky. "He cut too deep, too fast, too confidently." The words hit the courtroom like a hammer. Afterward, he realized what he had done. And instead of acknowledging it, he said, she wiped her cheek again, "He'll survive." "That's enough," the audience gasped. Judge Carpio looked at the surgeon. Dr. Miles shifted uncomfortably, suddenly unable to maintain eye contact. Lee continued, "And I stayed silent. Because every nurse who speaks up against him," she hesitated, "gets replaced." A ripple of anger spread across the courtroom. The prosecutor scribbled notes furiously. Judge Carpio's voice softened. "Miss Carter, why didn't you come forward earlier?" Lee closed her eyes. "Because no one cares when a nurse speaks. But today, when I saw that boy," she gestured toward Eli. Limping, struggling to stand, fighting to breathe, I realized I can't run anymore. She looked directly at Dr. Miles. Not from him, not from the guilt, not from the truth. The courtroom broke into whispers. Star, the surgeon, loses control. Dr. Miles stepped forward, eyes burning. This is ridiculous. You're emotional. You're exaggerating. You're trying to blame your incompetence on. Judge Carpio slammed his gavel. Dr. Miles. Enough, but the surgeon snapped. No, Your Honor, this is a nurse, a nobody. I'm a surgeon. His voice cracked with unfiltered arrogance. I save people. People like her follow orders. People like him. He pointed at Eli. Depend on me to live. I don't depend on anyone. Judge Carpio rose slowly from his seat. His silence alone made the room tremble. He walked toward the edge of the bench and stared directly at Dr. Miles. Doctor, his voice was cold. You just revealed the real problem. The surgeon blinked. What? You believe that saving a life gives you ownership of it. A heavy silence dropped across the room. You believe failure is impossible for you, so when it happens, you pretend it doesn't. The judge stepped closer, only inches from the edge. And you believe every person in this courtroom, nurses, workers, patients, even this court, exists beneath you. The surgeon's breath hitched. Judge Carpio's voice hardened. But today, Nurse Lee Carter did something you never could. The room leaned in. She admitted her fear, she admitted her hesitation, she admitted her truth. He paused. And that makes her infinitely bigger than you. Lee covered her mouth. Eli blinked rapidly. The surgeon's face flushed red. Star, the correction that changes everything. Judge Carpio turned to Lee. Miss Carter, your courage is noted and deeply respected. Lee nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. Then he turned to the prosecutor. Please take Miss Carter's statement into evidence and add new charges: suppression of medical error, violation of protocol, endangerment through negligence. A murmur swept the room. Dr. Miles stepped forward, panicked. You can't do that. You can't add charges now. Judge Carpio glared at him with steel in his eyes. This is my courtroom, not your hospital wing, not your operating room. He leaned closer. And certainly not your kingdom. Dr. Miles swallowed. For the first time, the arrogance broke. His breathing turned shallow, his shoulders sagged, his voice trembled. Your Honor, But the judge cut him off. No, doctor, save your breath, you'll need it. A hush fell. Because the consequences of your actions, he paused, are only beginning. Judge Carpio's words still hung in the air like a blade. Dr. Adrian Miles stood frozen, his once perfect confidence cracking like porcelain dropped on marble. His hands, usually steady enough to perform heart surgery, trembled. Around him, the courtroom rustled, quiet gasps, rustling jackets, shifting eyes, people trying to understand how a man so powerful could fall so quickly. But the fall was not over, not even close, because today the truth hadn't finished with him yet. Star, the second witness no one expected. Judge Carpio scanned the room. Is there anyone else, he asked, who wishes to speak regarding Dr. Miles' conduct? Silence, then a slow scrape. Someone stood up from the back row. Everyone turned. It was a man in a brown uniform, a hospital janitor. His hands were rough, his uniform faded, his posture humble. But his eyes carried something heavy. Pain, fear, and knowledge. Judge Carpio nodded gently. Sir, please step forward. Dr. Miles' face turned pale. The janitor walked quietly to the podium. State your name, the judge said. My name is Marcus Dale. The courtroom tilted their heads as if suddenly realizing he had been there all along, invisible, ignored, overlooked. Just like people Dr. Miles never cared to see, Marcus swallowed, gripping the sides of the podium. I wasn't supposed to be there that night, he said. I wasn't even working that shift. But another janitor called in sick and I covered. His voice shook, but he continued. I was cleaning the hallway outside the operating room when I heard shouting. A hush fell across the courtroom. Marcus lowered his gaze. I heard Dr. Miles yell, if anyone says a word about this, I'll make sure you never work again. Gasps. Lee froze. Eli's mother clutched her chest. The prosecutor's pen stopped mid-stroke. Judge Carpio's jaw tightened. The janitor continued, voice shaking. And then I heard something else. He hesitated. What did you hear, Mr. Dale? The judge asked. Marcus took a deep breath. I heard him say, just stitch him up. He'll live. We're not wasting the whole night on a nobody. The courtroom exploded in whispers. Even the court officer looked stunned. Dr. Miles stepped forward. This is absurd. He's a janitor. He misheard. Judge Carpio raised a hand. Doctor, enough. But the surgeon couldn't stop. Your Honor, this is insane. You're believing a nurse who's emotional and a janitor who listens through doors. Do you know what kind of people these are? He instantly realized the mistake. But it was too late. The courtroom went still. Judge Carpio stared at him with a coldness that sliced deeper than any gavel. "What kind of people?" he repeated quietly. "Do you think they are, Doctor?" Dr. Miles opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Marcus looked at him, not with anger but disappointment. "You don't remember me, Doctor," Marcus said softly, "but I cleaned your office for 4 years." The silence in the room grew heavy. "You never said hello, never said thank you. Never even looked at me." His voice cracked. "I know I'm just a janitor, but that night, someone almost died because you didn't care." Tears welled in his eyes. "And people like me, we see everything, we hear everything. We remember everything." Judge Carpio nodded, deeply moved. "Thank you, Mr. Dale. Your testimony is invaluable." Marcus stepped away, wiping his face. The courtroom watched him go. And for the first time, Dr. Miles looked genuinely afraid. "Star, the surgeon starts to break." Dr. Miles staggered back a step. His voice, once sharp and arrogant, now trembled at the edges. This is a setup," he said weakly. "A conspiracy, nurses, janitors, patients, you're all." But the words wouldn't form, because deep inside he knew this wasn't a conspiracy. This was accountability. And he had never experienced it before. Judge Carpio leaned forward. "Dr. Miles, are you aware that multiple staff members submitted anonymous reports about your behavior over the last 3 years?" The surgeon blinked. "What reports?" "Bullying, threats, verbal abuse, unprofessional conduct." Dr. Miles shook his head violently. No, those were exaggerations. People jealous of me. People threatened by me. His voice cracked. He wasn't speaking like a surgeon anymore. He was speaking like a drowning man grasping at air. Judge Carpio's expression hardened. "Doctor, what happens when a man begins to believe he is too important to be questioned?" Dr. Miles stammered. I don't." "What happens?" the judge continued. "When a man convinces himself he is above the people he serves." The surgeon's lips quivered. "And what happens?" Judge Carpio said softly. "When a man forgets that every human being, no matter their job, income, or status, is equal in dignity and worth." Dr. Miles didn't answer. Not because he refused, but because he couldn't. Star, the moment the mask finally falls, suddenly the surgeon's shoulders collapsed. His breath hitched, his eyes darted, his posture softened, and then he whispered something no one expected. "I didn't mean for him to get hurt." His voice cracked, shaky, small. He looked at Eli for the first time, not with arrogance, but with something close to regret. I was tired, I was frustrated, I shouldn't have operated. But I didn't want to admit it, I didn't want to look weak." He wiped his eyes quickly, as if ashamed to be seen crying. "I've spent my whole life trying to be perfect. I thought if I admitted mistakes, everything would collapse." He swallowed. "I guess it collapsed anyway." Eli stared at him, speechless. Eli's mother cried silently. Even Lee looked surprised. Judge Carpio let the room stay quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Dr. Miles, this is the first honest thing you have said today." The surgeon closed his eyes, his voice shook. "I'm sorry." The words weren't strong, they weren't heroic, they were broken, human, defeated. Judge Carpio nodded slowly. "Good," he said, "because this courtroom does not destroy men, it reveals them." The surgeon dropped his head into his hands. For the first time in his career, he wasn't Dr. Adrian Miles, the untouchable superstar surgeon. He was simply a man who made a mistake, a man who hid the truth. A man who finally broke. Dr. Adrian Miles remained at the defense table, shoulders collapsed, fingers shaking, head buried in his hands. For a man who once carried himself like a god, he now looked painfully human. But the courtroom wasn't done with him, not even close, because something was coming, something none of them expected. A confrontation that would change everything. Star, the mother stands. Eli sat quietly beside his mother. Throughout the entire testimony, she had kept her hand on her son's arm, trying to give him silent strength. She had listened. She had cried. She had clenched her fists. But not once had she spoken, until now. She stood up. Every eye turned toward her. Even Judge Carpio was surprised. "Yes, ma'am," he said gently. She stepped forward, her voice trembling but powerful. "Your Honor, may I say something?" "Of course," Carpio replied. She walked to the podium, tears already pooling in her eyes. She looked at Dr. Miles, but not with hatred, with heartbreak. "Doctor," she began quietly, "my son trusted you. We trusted you. When the hospital told us you would be operating, I thought we were lucky. I thought we got the best doctor." Her voice cracked. "You talked to me for only 30 seconds, before rushing away without even looking into my son's eyes." The surgeon swallowed hard. "And when he came out of surgery, I asked you what went wrong. You shrugged." A tear fell down her cheek. "You said, these things happen." The courtroom went silent, not a cough, not a rustle, not a whisper, just the sound of a grieving mother finally speaking her truth. She steadied herself on the podium. "Dr. Miles, you didn't just hurt my son's leg, you hurt my baby's future, his confidence, his happiness." Her voice dropped to a whisper, "And you walked away like nothing happened." The judge watched her intently, hands folded in front of him. She wiped her tears, inhaled deeply, and whispered one line that shattered the surgeon completely. "Do you know what it feels like to watch your child suffer because of someone's ego?" Dr. Miles blinked rapidly, tears rising again. He tried to answer, but no words came. Judge Carpio spoke softly. "Thank you. Your words will weigh heavily on this court's decision." She nodded shakily and returned to her seat. Eli squeezed her hand. And even the courtroom officer looked away, trying to hide emotion. "Star, the prosecutor's final strike," the prosecutor, Mr. Hartwell, a sharp, stern man who rarely showed emotion, stood slowly. "Your Honor," he began, "I believe there is one more piece of evidence the court should hear." Dr. Miles tensed. Judge Carpio raised an eyebrow. "Proceed." Hartwell lifted a thin file. Inside were printed email transcripts. "Dr. Miles," he said, "these are internal emails you sent to hospital administration in the weeks after Eli Turner's operation." The surgeon's face drained. Hartwell cleared his throat and read. "Patient sustained nerve damage due to pre-existing poor anatomy." Another, "His condition is not the result of surgical error." And finally, "Mother is dramatic and overreacting." The courtroom erupted in disgusted murmurs. Eli's mother covered her mouth, devastated. Lee bowed her head, eyes burning with anger. Judge Carpio clenched his jaw. The surgeon whispered, "That's not, I didn't mean, those were." But Hartwell didn't stop. He stepped closer. "You wrote these to protect yourself, not to protect the truth." Silence. Judge Carpio leaned forward. "Doctor, do you stand by these statements?" The surgeon hesitated. His lips trembled. I don't know any more." Carpio stared at him. "Let me make this perfectly clear," he said, voice calm but sharp enough to cut glass. "A mistake can be forgiven, a lie cannot." The room froze. And the surgeon, for the first time in his life, looked like a man realizing he had no defense left. Star, the sudden outburst, before anyone could speak again, the defense attorney, Mr. Grayson, a slim, nervous man in an expensive suit, stood up abruptly. "Your Honor, I must object to the emotional nature of this proceeding." Judge Carpio tilted his head. "Objection to what exactly?" Grayson waved his hands wildly. To everything. This entire room is biased against my client. The media is watching. People are exaggerating. This is a smear campaign." He pointed toward Eli and his mother. "They are emotional actors, trying to ruin a brilliant man's career. This entire story is dramatized for sympathy. Enough." Judge Carpio's voice thundered across the room. It wasn't loud because he shouted, it was loud because it carried weight. Everyone fell silent. "Mr. Grayson," the judge said sternly, "if you speak about these people, this mother, this son, these witnesses, with such disrespect again, you will be removed from my courtroom." Grayson froze. Carpio continued. "This is not a performance. This is not a game. This is a court of law, and real human lives are at stake." Dr. Miles stared at the floor, ashamed even of his own lawyer. Eli's mother wiped her tears quietly. The courtroom breathed again. Star, the moment of no return, Judge Carpio turned back to Dr. Miles. "Doctor," he said quiet.
Adrian looked up, eyes shattered. "This was one mistake," he whispered. "One mistake." Judge Carpio shook his head. "No, doctor. It was one life." The gavel struck. Bang. Court is adjourned. The finality of that sound echoed like a hammer hitting the last nail in the coffin of Dr. Adrian Cole's career. Officers escorted him away. This time without resistance. His head lowered. His ego gone. His kingdom reduced to dust. A sob escaped from someone in the audience. Adrian looked up, eyes shattered. "This was one mistake," he whispered. "One mistake." Judge Carpio shook his head. "No, doctor. It was one life." The gavel struck. Bang. Court is adjourned. The finality of that sound echoed like a hammer hitting the last nail in the coffin of Dr. Adrian Cole's career. Officers escorted him away. This time without resistance. His head lowered. His ego gone. His kingdom reduced to dust. Judge Carpio's clerk approached the bench. Your Honor, we have one more piece of evidence submitted by the victim's family. And what would that be? The judge asked. A voicemail. Adrian's stomach dropped. Play it, Judge Carpio commanded. The courtroom speakers crackled. Then a weak, trembling voice filled the room. It was the patient. Her voice was soft, afraid, barely above a whisper. Dr. Cole. I don't feel right. My stomach hurts so much. I can't breathe well. Please, can someone help me? The courtroom froze. Then the timestamp appeared on screen. 3:05 p.m., 6 minutes before Drive Cole left the hospital. Adrian's knees buckled. No, he whispered. No, no, no. I didn't hear that. I swear I didn't, I never. Judge Carpio's tone was steady as steel. Doctor, the records show the voicemail was forwarded directly to your phone. Adrian shook his head violently. I was busy. I had a fundraiser. Judge Carpio's palm struck the bench sharply. You had a patient dying. The room shook with the force of those words. You had a responsibility greater than a fundraiser, greater than a photo op, greater than your public image. Adrian stood speechless. Broken. Small. The law does not punish you for being a surgeon, Judge Carpio continued. It punishes you for abandoning your duty. Adrian collapsed into the chair behind him, hands trembling uncontrollably. His voice, once overflowing with ego, reduced to a whisper. What have I done? Judge Carpio answered with quiet finality. You forgot what it means to be human. The sentence. The courtroom held its breath. Even the air felt heavier. Judge Carpio lifted his gavel. Dr. Adrian Cole, for criminal negligence resulting in loss of life, for lack of remorse, for attempting to manipulate this court with arrogance rather than truth. The surgeon closed his eyes. You will remain in custody until trial. And this court will strongly recommend full license revocation. The breaking of a God complex. The courtroom doors slammed shut behind Dr. Adrian Cole as officers attempted to escort him out, but the surgeon twisted, resisting like a man watching his world collapse in slow motion. His voice cracked. Not with authority. But with fear. Your Honor, please, wait. I can explain. Judge Carpio didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't show anger. His silence itself was a judgment. Because when a man who thought he was untouchable finally falls, the echo is louder than any sentence. The officers tightened their grip. Adrian shoved against them desperately. I saved lives. I built that hospital's reputation. You can't do this to me. Judge Carpio finally spoke, his tone calm but sharp enough to cut through the surgeon's hysteria. You saved lives in the past, doctor. But justice is rendered for the life you neglected in the present. The words hit Adrian like a punch. His breathing became frantic, desperate, almost pleading. And no, please. Judge Carpio. I didn't know she was bleeding internally. I thought the nurse was overreacting. The judge lifted an eyebrow. There it is again. He leaned forward. That same arrogance. That same dismissal. That same belief that no one's judgment matters except your own. A quiet murmur ran through the spectators. Adrian's eyes darted toward his wife, Elena. She sat in the second row, hands clasped, eyes glistening. Not with anger. Not with sympathy. But with heartbreak. Because she'd known for years what the world was now discovering. Her husband had built a kingdom on ego. And now that ego was burning. Elena. Adrian called, reaching out. Tell him. Tell the court I'm not a monster. But she didn't move. Didn't stand. Didn't speak. She simply whispered, barely audible. "Adrian, stop." His face crumpled. Like a man watching the last rope holding his life together snap. The final evidence. The surgeon rose. Every eye in the courtroom clung to him. Judge Carpio's tone deepened. "You are charged with criminal negligence resulting in the death of a patient under your care. You showed no remorse. No responsibility. And no professional integrity in this courtroom." Adrian's breathing became shallow. "For these reasons," the judge continued, "I am ordering the immediate suspension of your medical license pending further review." The air cracked. "And I am remanding you into custody until your full trial date." The surgeon's mouth fell open. What? Custody? No. No. I'm a surgeon. I save lives. You can't. Two officers stepped forward. Judge Carpio's voice was unshakable. "Dr. Cole. You showed this court what kind of man you are. Now the law will show you the consequences." The surgeon lunged forward. "I'm not a criminal." But the officers restrained him as gasps rippled through the room. His expensive watch slid from his wrist and hit the floor with a sharp metallic click. For the first time since the hearing began, Dr. Adrian Cole broke. Not with anger. Not with arrogance. But with fear. And Judge Carpio merely watched, expression calm, steady, and unchanging. Because justice finally had a voice. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "I perform more surgeries in a month than most surgeons do in half a year. One complication, and suddenly I'm a criminal. No. I won't accept that." Judge Carpio didn't blink. "Complication," he repeated. "You call it a complication?" He lifted the patient file. "This wasn't a complication, doctor. This was neglect. A preventable tragedy." The judge paused as the weight of his words settled into the room. And instead of remorse, his eyes locked onto the surgeon. "You walked into my courtroom with arrogance, entitlement, and zero accountability." A hum of agreement moved from bench to bench behind the defense table. Adrian's irritation began to twist into panic. His voice shook. "Your Honor, I have saved hundreds of lives. I've worked 80-hour weeks for years. My reputation, my career, everything I've done." Judge Carpio interrupted softly. "Yes. Your career. Let's talk about that." He pulled out a second folder. "This contains complaints from patients over the last 6 years. Not 1 or 2, but 11. Adrian stared. His lawyer's face dropped. And while none resulted in formal suspension, the judge continued, flipping through papers, they paint a picture of someone who stopped seeing patients as humans, and started seeing them as numbers. The surgeon clenched his jaw. "Are you really going to base a legal judgment on complaints? Every doctor gets complaints." Judge Carpio shook his head. "No, doctor. I'm going to base my judgment on evidence, testimony, and your behavior here today." Adrian swallowed hard. The judge leaned back, folded his hands, and finally said the one sentence that made the surgeon's world stop spinning. "Dr. Cole, stand up." The surgeon hesitated. "Now." Dr. Adrian Cole didn't realize it yet. But this was the moment everything he'd built over 22 years of fame, ego, and privilege began to collapse. The courtroom had gone so quiet that even the fluorescent lights above seemed louder than the man standing in front of the bench. Judge Franko Carpio's voice was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that comes right before a storm destroys everything in its path. Dr. Cole, the judge said slowly, you stated under oath that your patient was not your responsibility once the anesthesia wore off. Is that correct? Adrian shifted. For the first time, he looked genuinely uncomfortable. Yes, he replied, hesitating. Technically, medically, it was the nurse's duty to observe recovery. Not mine. Judge Carpio leaned forward slightly. And yet, he continued, we have testimony from Nurse Valeria Gomez, stating that she repeatedly paged you when the patient showed signs of internal bleeding, and you ignored every single page. A ripple moved through the room. Adrian clarified, I was in another procedure. I couldn't just stop. That's not how surgery works. Judge Carpio held up the chart. This says you were done with your second procedure at 3:12 p.m. The first emergency call came at 2:47 p.m. Adrian's mouth opened, but nothing came out. The judge wasn't done. And then, he said with quiet fury, you left the hospital at 4:03 p.m., not to check on your patient, but to attend a cocktail gala downtown, correct? A soft gasp echoed from the audience. Adrian instantly grew defensive. It wasn't a gala. It was a medical charity event. Judge Carpio raised a hand. Dr. Cole, I have the photographs. You were holding a glass of champagne and laughing on stage while your patient's vitals were crashing. Now the surgeon's face drained of color. His lawyer whispered urgently, say nothing. Do not dig deeper. But Adrian Cole's ego wouldn't allow silence. Doctor, he said quietly. You have heard testimony from a nurse, a janitor, a mother, and the injured man himself. You have read your own words, words you wrote in confidence, believing no one would ever see them. The surgeon trembled. Do you have anything else to say before this court moves toward sentencing? The room leaned forward. Air thick with tension. Every eye on the fallen surgeon. He wiped his face. His voice broke. Yes, he whispered. He stepped toward the podium, legs shaking. I don't deserve forgiveness. The room stiffened. He continued. When I was younger, I thought being a surgeon made me special. Above people. Above mistakes. Above consequences. He swallowed hard. I forgot that every person who lies on my operating table is someone's family. Someone's child. Someone's entire world. Tears spilled down his face. I hurt your son, he said, turning to Eli's mother. I hurt him in ways I never acknowledged. You trusted me, and I betrayed that trust. Eli blinked, stunned by the sincerity. And Mr. Dale, the surgeon whispered. You're right. I never saw you. I never saw any of the people who helped me. I thought I was more important. He looked at Leah. And Nurse Turner, you were right to speak up. I'm sorry I tried to silence you. Leah's eyes softened, just for a second. The surgeon turned back to Judge Carpio. His face collapsed. I'm not asking for mercy. I'm asking for a chance, even if it's small. To learn how to be a better man than I've been. The silence that followed was heavy. The kind of silence that settles on a room before fate shifts. Judge Carpio studied him for a long, long moment. Then he said. Dr. Miles. Your words have been heard. The courtroom braced itself. Because they knew. The storm was coming. And Judge Carpio's verdict was only minutes away. I am Christopher. Now I will explain this real incident.